Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel, and an extra special welcome because this is my very first video here. We're going to be experimenting with some India inks today. I got a huge haul of art supplies for my birthday this year, but they are all mediums that I've never worked with before, so I'd like to walk you through how I test out new art supplies, and then we'll jump into a portrait I made just for this video. The inks that came in this pack are the Dr. P.H. Martin's India inks of the Bombay variety. I have a link to the Amazon page that I bought them from if you'd like to check them out. It's down below. The pack I got includes the colors magenta, red, bright red, yellow, grass green, green, teal, blue, and violet. I also have brown, black, and white in this pack as well. So here I am trying each of the bottles of ink out. They work a lot like watercolors, and I wanted to see how easy it was to make a gradient with each of them. Some were definitely a little bit more difficult than others, such as the bright red, brown, and black. But I found that it was mostly just user error because I added way too much water, and that's a common theme for pretty much the rest of this video. India inks, as I learned from watching other artists like I'm a Wonder, and how she works with acrylic inks, is that while they do apply to the page similarly to watercolors, they dry super quick. Also, once they are down, they are staying there for good. Maybe you can get an accidental dot or two up if you act immediately, but they are so very nerve-wracking in the way that they are extremely permanent. But when I jump into my portrait later, you will see that the permanence aspect is definitely a strength as well if you're comfortable with working quickly. You can see as I go back over the colors during the testing, the gradients become much more smooth, and the pigment is way more prominent, even where I used too much water and it bloomed from earlier. I also wanted to test out with the little lines on the side, how far does the ink spread out? Is it easy to make fine details? For the most part, I found that it was. Some of the more saturated colors definitely bloomed a little bit on the paper, but overall the lines worked very similarly to calligraphy ink and watercolors. The brown was kind of the weirdest color to work with. It looks fine in the bottle, but when you actually apply to the page, it's more of a diluted reddish purple than anything else. Even after laying on, the pigment didn't really get any darker either. So I don't see myself using that particular ink in the future. And then with the black, with the water, it sort of spread out to the edges instead of staying in a main gradient. So here we are with the portrait I decided to try these inks out on. I started with a sketch in my notebook and transferred it to a 12 by 9-inch page of 140-pound watercolor paper using a red watercolor pencil. Then, to make the lines of her skin more prominent, I go in with my Artline fine liner in the 0.3mm size. I like this liner because it's not too thick or too thin, and it doesn't bleed a lot on the page, and I can go in and make darker lines or thicken up my lines without going overboard. When I do line work, I try not to go too heavy and leave spaces in between the forms as well. Your brain and colors sort of fill in those spaces, and it helps the fine line sort of fade into the finished piece, so it's not as coming to the forefront there. I've titled this piece Moonstruck, which is the word for that feeling you get gazing at a full moon. I've always really enjoyed going out at night, especially in college, and sitting under the full moon with friends to drink tea that we had stored in our dorm rooms or some little snacks. Now that I live in Chicago, I can't really do that as I don't have a yard. It's kind of scary at night. And now during quarantine, I spend almost all of my time indoors. As I am immunocompromised, I've been inside since the beginning of March, and my sister/roommate goes out to get groceries, or we just end up getting things delivered. So I'm super glad I get to start this YouTube channel and post on Instagram a bit more, just so I can reconnect with the outside world that I've been missing out on pretty much the entire year. Here we are going in with the bright red. Surprisingly made the perfect skin shading tone for this piece, as I wanted her to be very pale but still have a bit of life left in her cheeks. Also, I'm so sorry this part of the video is blurry. I zoomed in and did not refocus my camera, but no worries, I sped this up a bit more so you don't have to tolerate it for very long. I'm using a technique from watercoloring that worked very well during this. I'm using a good bit of water and pigment to apply a lot to the page at once, then I'm adding more water to my brush, dragging out that color, and then drying my brush on some paper towel, using it to pick up excess pigment and blend out that edge. This entire time I'm panicking a lot. I was very proud of the idea and the sketch I made, and I did not want to mess anything up. So I'm glad my previous experience with watercolors really helped me out with here. I'm so happy with how her skin tone came out and the layering I was able to do because the underlayer had dried so fast. I keep going in with higher pigment to water ratio and I start pushing those edges back so the angles of her face can really stand out. I like the expression I gave her a lot. Just a very soft but definitely dazed kind of look, like she's really being enchanted by looking at the moon. So then I go in with the violet pigment and I water it down very heavily. This is also the first time I've used purple to do shading, as I usually do blue or just darker shades of the original color, but I wanted to make sure her skin was cool toned and this worked out very well. Now we jump into the most difficult part of this entire portrait, which is the hair. I usually do not have a problem with sketching hair or using colored pencils, but because of how fast the ink dries and how I wanted to build up thin layers of color, it made it very difficult to apply and even coat each time. I'm using a mixture of blue and black for her hair. I wanted it to be a cool tone, like her face and her skin color, but the black has a green undertone, so mixing the pigments took a long time off camera. It ended up being like half blue to 1 part black pigment ratio because of how much green was in the black. Anyway, we got there eventually. Painting the hair alone took over 3 hours to complete, and my camera does some weird funky stuff with the memory and how long you can record a single video clip, so overall it took about 5 hours to get it done. Now I'm going in and adding some deeper values so the hair can exist in a more solid space. This was a bit difficult to do because I didn't want the hair to be a dark black, and every time I dipped my brush in water it would dilute the whole puddle of pigment on my palette, plus inks dry much lighter than when they are applied. So a little warning to those of you who want to try this out as well: mix your colors a little bit darker and then use a lot less water than your instincts tell you to from watercolors. It'll really help get those darker values and take way less time and still not be a completely solid black like I didn't want here. Her hairline was probably the most awkward part of the process, as the brush I was using didn't have a great point, and the paint would bleed a good bit with both the black and blue inks as it did in the trial page. And that's the hair done for now. You can really see with the eyebrows just how much the black pigment does not want to stay put when I apply it, but I definitely think that was just me using too much water again. I'm adding shading to her eyes now and making them blue as well, but I leave her pupils colorless for now. As we zoom out here, we can see the full portrait piece, and here is the main reason why I chose to use inks with this. I had gouache in my art haul as well, but I tried them out and I think I need to mess around with them a bit more, as they remind me of oil paints and I'm a bit rusty with those techniques, but there'll be a video on that very soon. So the main reason why I wanted to use the inks is because she is laying on her back and mostly submerged in water. So I can add blue pigment over the existing image and make it easily appear that she's in water. Another really fun thing that I learned while painting that I did not know before is that you don't need blue to make a really nice and deep colored blue. I mixed the plain green and the violet together in equal measure, and it somehow turned into the exact shade I spent an hour trying to mix on my palette off screen. So if you need a fun little color theory tip, there it is. Also, be sure to mess around and mix with your colors when you are getting a new art supply. You learn a lot just from fussing around and having a gentle panic about it. So then I go in with a larger brush here, trying to get a very smooth, darker color and blend it out, especially around the moon. Then I go in and add the blue values over her hair, really trying to give it dimension and push some of those tendrils of hair behind the others. I leave some parts without any pigment or with just a little to show that they are floating up on the water surface. At this point, I'm really liking how this whole portrait has turned out. It was a great first experiment and a piece that I'm actually proud to show you as my first YouTube video. But now it's time for the finishing touches. We take the Artline fine liner again and do the pupils, eyebrows, eyeliner, and lashes. Then we go and touch up the moon and make it as pure white as possible with the ink. It's a little wonky on the right side, but I go and fix that after, once I finish recording. I had also forgotten the highlights, so you'll see those in the final shots in a moment. Lastly, we add the water's edge lines, and honestly, I went a little bit overboard. Pretty much every section I left out from the blue pigment before. I tried to outline with the ink, and it kind of ruined it a little bit. I'm definitely going to be much more sparing with it in the future. And there we are. You can find the full picture of the finished piece on my Instagram at RazelDazzle. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you know when I release my next video. Bye for now!